A man walks into a room where someone is holding a gun to another person's head. And he has only one job: get the hostages out alive. He has no weapons, no special forces storming the building, no magic, just his voice. And somehow, it works. Not just once or twice in the vast majority of cases, because failure costs lives. The techniques hostage negotiators use, the ones that stop people from pulling triggers, turned out to be some of the most powerful negotiation tools ever used in business too. In tense negotiations, every instinct tells you to take control. Raise your voice, show your strength, force the other side to give in, maybe compromise and just split the difference. And yet, what we instinctively do usually only makes things worse. It's a brisk September morning in 1993 at a Chase Manhattan bank in Brooklyn. It was a morning like any other, people grabbing coffee, recovering from their commute, and suddenly, the world breaks. Two men with guns stormed the building, trapping three terrified employees inside. Within minutes, the street is a war zone. Outside the bank, it's chaos, sirens, flashing lights, NYPD snipers taking positions on the rooftops. And inside, two men with guns pointing at three hostages. When Chris Voss, an FBI negotiator, arrives at the scene, the situation is a mess. You can feel the high-velocity energy in the air. The robbers seem to be going crazy. The natural human instinct in a moment like this is to fight or flight. And if you choose to fight, you grab a bullhorn and order the robbers to come out with their hands up and surrender. Wouldn't you want to show power, demand, force your hand? After all, you've got half of the city's police behind you ready to storm the building. But Chris doesn't do any of that. Instead, he does something that feels completely wrong in that situation. Something that would eventually become one of the most powerful negotiation techniques ever used in business. He slows down and uses that calm, deep voice almost like a late-night FM DJ. The robber on the other end seems to be erratic and spends the first few hours blaming everyone else. He tells Voss his partner is crazy and might kill the hostages at any second. He's trying to corner the FBI, making them feel like they have no choice but to give in. But the man in the bank wasn't in control. He was terrified. When we are under extreme stress, our brains go into survival mode. It's almost like a switch flips. You cannot reason with a person whose brain is screaming danger. So instead of creating more danger by threatening, screaming, and demanding, Voss begins with a tactical empathy. And then he did something simple. He listened. But he listened not just to the robber's threats, but to his tone and the pauses between the threats. And something didn't add up. There's a stark difference between how cold-blooded killers and lunatics talk, and the robber didn't seem to be any of those. He didn't sound like a cold-blooded killer. He sounded like a human being who was scared to death of what would happen the second he walked out that door. After hours of back and forth talking and listening, Voss finally asks a simple question. Do you want to come out? The screaming stops, the robber pauses, and then he whispers, I don't know how I do that.
Big Giant, yes, if I can give him a plan. And so now this is a 180-degree turn on the conversation.
And that was the breakthrough. By staying calm and making the other side feel heard, Voss turned a deadly standoff into an eventual surrender. Nobody was killed. And Voss didn't use a gun. He used a calm voice to save lives. Why would a calm voice work on someone who is seconds away from pulling a trigger? Imagine a toggle switch inside a human brain. On one side, you have the prefrontal cortex, your logic center. This is the part of you that does math, weighs pros and cons, and thinks about the future. On the other side is the limbic system, the ancient emotional survival center. When you're under extreme stress, like being trapped in a bank surrounded by snipers, your brain doesn't care about logic anymore. The limbic system hijacks the controls. You aren't thinking, you are surviving. If a negotiator shouts demands through a bullhorn, they are just throwing gasoline on a limbic fire. That's why Chris's tactical empathy was so effective. But empathy doesn't mean being nice, it doesn't mean agreeing, and it definitely doesn't mean being soft. It's an information-gathering tool. Voss wasn't just being a nice guy to a criminal. He was using his voice to trigger a biological response. By calmly labeling the robber's fears, the worry about what happens when they walk out, he forced the robber's brain to process those emotions. This helps calm the limbic system and brings the logic center back online.
Well, labeling is the best way to practice tactical empathy. In its strictest form, it's just saying or writing, it seems like, it sounds like, it looks like, putting a label on the dynamic. And science is showing us now that if we label a negative, it diminishes it.
What's interesting, some research suggests that when people feel understood, the brain releases trust-related chemicals like oxytocin. And suddenly, the energy shifted. When the robber said, "I don't know how I do it," his logic center was back online. Voss was no longer an adversary. He was a partner to somebody looking for a way out of the very difficult situation. And to reinforce trust, Voss didn't just stay on the phone. He stepped into the line of fire. He walked out in front of the bank to meet one of the robbers face to face. The robber didn't see a threat anymore. He saw the person who finally understood him. One of the bank robbers surrendered directly to Voss, ending the crisis without anyone being killed. It was a total victory. But it was won because the negotiators used empathy instead of aggression, and because of what they were specifically listening for. It was something hidden in the conversation, something Chris Voss later called a black swan. A black swan is a hidden piece of information that can completely change a negotiation. And as we move from the streets of Brooklyn into the high-stakes world of business, you'll see that the black swan can easily be what separates a terrible deal from a great one. But before we move into business negotiations, we need to talk about one of the most overused cliches in the corporate world: win-win. Several years after the standoff in Brooklyn, Chris Voss was in a setting very different from a crime scene: Harvard Law School. He wasn't there to investigate a crime, but to take their world-class negotiation course. The room was filled with brilliant students. They had spent years studying the gold standard of business negotiations, finding win-win solutions, splitting the difference, but Voss knew that in a hostage situation, you can't split the difference. You can't give the bank robber half a hostage and call it a success. So he wanted to see if the FBI techniques worked on some of the brightest business minds in the country. In that simulated negotiation, a Harvard student was the buyer with a strict secret budget, and Voss was the seller. The student started with the usual logic. He tried to win first by lowballing. But Voss didn't argue. He didn't even make a counteroffer. But instead of just rejecting, Voss was asking the student, "How am I supposed to make that price work?"
Bob Mnookin, the head of their program on negotiation, says empathy is just describing and demonstrating an understanding of the needs, interests, and perspective of your counterpart without necessarily agreeing.
By asking how, Voss forced the student's brain to do the work for him. And the student started looking for ways to solve Voss's problem instead of arguing some artificial number. The student felt in control because he was the one giving the answers. According to Voss, when the timer hit 0, the instructor looked at the results and laughed. Voss hadn't split the difference. He hadn't compromised at all. He had walked away with every single dime the student had in his budget. The student negotiated the full price against himself. Okay, great. An expert FBI negotiator took advantage of the student. How is it fair, right? But what is fair? You know what's interesting? The student didn't feel cheated. He felt the deal was entirely fair. Because Voss had used tactical empathy and collaboration, the student felt so understood and respected and in control that he was happy to give up his entire budget to make the deal work. That shows that win-win and fairness are subjective. They are rarely about some number in some artificial middle. They are about how the other person feels during the negotiation and about discovering their black swan. Trammell Crow Company has developed and acquired more than 3,000 buildings worth tens of billions of dollars. Now, imagine a quiet, large corporate boardroom where 7 people are sitting around a table. That's not a lot of people, but this isn't a small meeting. On one side of the table in that boardroom sit 6 powerful partners. On the other side, just one man, Joel Peterson. It's a billion-dollar negotiation to settle Joel's departure from the company. Suddenly, the most senior partner leans forward and makes a demand that is totally unfair and off the wall. He is testing Peterson to see if he will cave under the pressure of a billion-dollar collapse. In a moment like this, your body wants to take over. Your heart rate spikes and your palms sweat. You feel like shouting and cursing about how unfairly you're being treated by your so-called partners, people you've spent years working shoulder to shoulder with. But Peterson doesn't shout. Instead, he uses a mental tool called the balcony. Imagine you are performing on a stage. The balcony is a mental place of calm and self-control overlooking that stage. It's a place where you stop framing, internalizing, reacting, and just observe. So, Peterson pauses. Then he stands up and says, "Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure working with you. I'm sorry it has to end this way, but I have a plane to catch." And then he walks out. Peterson doesn't even make it to the airport before his phone rings. Partners called him, pleading to come back. By walking away, Peterson built them a so-called golden bridge. And that is a very important tactic in negotiations. Often, people resist a deal because they are afraid of looking like they lost. But by walking out respectfully, Peterson didn't start a win-lose, ego-driven bar fight where somebody just had to lose. By walking out, he created a vacuum that forced the partners to face the consequences of no deal at all.
So if I try to extricate from you politely and you won't allow me to extricate politely, that just tells me I'm on the right track and I need to get out of this conversation.
The walk away exposed something hidden, that mysterious black swan. The black swan was the fact that the partners were bluffing. They used aggression to hide the fact that they needed Peterson just as much, if not more, as he needed them. By the time he reached his hotel, the partners had dropped their unfair demands. Shortly after, they signed a massive agreement that settled the dispute, and Peterson walked away not just with a successful deal, but with something even more valuable: respect. Every story we just covered had the same hidden enemy. Not the bank robbers or the Harvard students or the 6 partners in that boardroom. The biggest obstacle in every one of those rooms was the mindset. It was the person or the people who walked in thinking they're ready to win. We are often our own most difficult opponents because we react without thinking.
If you get the first minute right, you set your conversation up for success. Get it wrong, your conversations will be longer, less effective, and more frustrating.
But true negotiation shouldn't be a tug of war. It's a shared puzzle. Imagine 2 kids fighting over an orange. Tired of their fighting, their mom comes in and splits the orange in half. Here, compromise, win-win, go play. But both kids walk away unhappy because one wanted the juice to drink and the other wanted the peel for a cake. If the mom had simply asked what they really wanted, both kids could have had 100% of what they needed. This is the trap of splitting the difference. Because it's a lazy way to avoid the discomfort of a real conversation, it leaves everyone with less than they came for.
People that split the difference just jack up the numbers that they want, put them way out of line, and it's actually a sucker move. They got you back to where they wanted to be the whole time, but they're lying to you, and you're going to think it's fair, the F word, and you're going to be suckered by that move.
From my experience, the most powerful tool when it comes to negotiations isn't a loud voice, but a quiet one that listens for that black swan, the hidden piece of information that can change the entire trajectory of a negotiation. To find it, you need to be soft on the person but hard on the problem. And you treat the other side with unconditional respect, always. Not because they're right, but because people listen better when they feel understood. Sometimes, the most respectful thing you can do is just stand up and walk away, and sometimes all you need is just another camel. Sometimes the math of a deal just doesn't add up. No matter how much you empathize or listen, you find yourself stuck. There's an old story about a father who left his camels to his 3 sons. In his will, he said the oldest should get half, the middle son a third, and the youngest would get a 9th. The math is relatively simple. The only problem, they were 17 camels. No matter how you slice and dice the numbers, without slicing and dicing the camels, you can't divide 17 by 2 or 3 or 9 without making a mess. It felt like an impossible win-lose battle, and the sons were at each other's throats. After getting nowhere, they went to a wise woman for help.
I don't know if I can help you, but here, just take my camel. I have no use for it anyway.
Not only did the man have more camels now, but with 18 camels, suddenly the math worked. The oldest son took 9 camels, a half, the middle took a third, 6 camels, and the youngest took a 9th, 2 camels. Finally, they all had their fair share of camels, just as their dad wanted. But there was one extra camel. 9 plus 6 plus 2 equals 17. So happy and relieved, they decided not to fight over the last camel and just to give that camel to the wise woman for helping them. Throughout my career, I've discovered that many business conflicts look a lot like the story of the 3 sons and their 17 camels. We get so focused on the math that we forget to look at the real issue. But the story of the 18th camel isn't about the universal strategy. It's about perspective.
Scarves can be a big mistake. They can be deadly weapons, or they can be the source of enormous good. It all depends on your perspective.
Great negotiations are never about beating someone into submission. They are about listening, staying calm, showing respect, and sometimes finding that extra camel the creative solution that turns a deadlock into a shared victory. Because once you find it, you don't just split the difference. You find a partner, not an opponent. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the channel, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to sign up for our Business Excellence newsletter, and see you in the next video.